The pile of envelopes loomed on my kitchen counter like a shrine to petty tyranny. Every single one carried the self-important crest of the Pine Valley Homeowners Association, and every single one was still addressed to Harold and Margaret Chen, my grandparents, who had been gone for 3 years. I fanned them across the table, 37 individual violation notices, each one more absurd than the one before. My attorney, seated opposite me, lifted one of the letters. His face went from casual interest to barely concealed fury in seconds. He whispered something about federal statutes being trampled and immediately began snapping pictures with his phone. I'd taken ownership of the house 6 months earlier, once probate finally wrapped up. The plan had been straightforward: hang on to the property until I could fund the repairs it badly needed. Yeah, it looked weathered, but it wasn't abandoned. I visited every week, kept the water and electricity on, and made sure nothing collapsed into total ruin. What I never saw coming was crossing paths with Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, who treated her elected position like a holy crusade to make everyone miserable. The first wave of fines showed up on a random Tuesday. I nearly tossed them straight into the recycling, mistaking them for junk, until the certified mail stickers caught my eye. Inside were penalties for crimes like grass that dared to grow half an inch past regulation, a tiny flake of peeling paint on a back fence nobody could even see from the road, and other nonsense. Every fine was $150, and every envelope was addressed to 2 people who no longer existed. I phoned the HOA office that same day, calmly explaining that my grandparents had passed away, and that I was now the legal owner. The woman on the line, who I would later discover was Karen herself, interrupted me before I could finish. She informed me, in the tone of someone scolding a slow child, that ignorance of the covenants is no defense and that payment was due in 30 days, no exceptions. I started with the polite route. I mailed certified copies of the death certificates, the probate court orders, and a courteous cover letter asking them to update their records and please include my name and contact info going forward. 2 weeks late, another, thicker stack arrived. This batch included late fees and a cheerful warning that a lien would be placed on the property if I continued being difficult. The accompanying letter, signed with a flourish by Karen Mitchell, accused me of using so-called deceased owners as a flimsy dodge. She actually wrote the words "so-called" and put air quotes around them, as if my grandparents had faked their own deaths to get out of lawn maintenance. The fines multiplied like mold in a damp basement. Suddenly, the 20-year-old shutter color was unacceptable. Bushes that had peacefully existed for decades were now half an inch too tall. They even slapped me with the citation for excessive avian presence because a pair of cardinals dared to build a nest without submitting architectural drawings. By the end of month 3, the total topped $8 grand, and the threatening letters were landing in my mailbox like clockwork. Karen took to adding handwritten post-it notes, recommending I sell to someone who actually values community aesthetics. Then the registered letter arrived, the one that pushed me over the edge. It wasn't another petty fine. It was a formal notice of intent to foreclose on the house for violations racked up in the names of 2 dead people. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, digging through HOA statutes and debt collection laws, searching for anything that might stop this nightmare. Around I found it. The Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. My pulse hammered as I read that it is flat out illegal to knowingly pursue a debt against a deceased person once you've been notified of the death. I had notified them repeatedly, with documentation, and they had ignored every word. First thing the next morning, I cold called law firms until I reached James Morrison, a consumer protection attorney who lived for FSPA cases. I laid out the whole saga. There was dead silence on the line for several seconds, followed by a slow, delighted, "Could you run that by me one more time slower?" When I finished, he let out a low whistle and told me that in 2 decades of practice, he had never seen a more textbook violation of federal law. We met that same afternoon. By the time I handed over the towering stack of notices, death certificates, and Karen's passive-aggressive masterpieces, James looked like a kid who'd just been handed the keys to a candy store. He didn't stop at filing a lawsuit. He submitted formal complaints to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, and our state attorney general. He explained, with barely suppressed glee, that every collection attempt sent to my dead grandparents after official notification constituted a separate violation to $1,000 statutory damages per incident. 37 notices meant the HOA was staring down tens of thousands in penalties before we even got to punitive damages for what any reasonable person would call deliberate harassment. The lawsuit papers were served on a Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of the Pine Valley HOA's monthly board meeting. My neighbor Tom, who was stuck there as treasurer, texted me blow by blow. The process server strode in like he owned the place, handed the thick envelope to Karen Mitchell personally, and walked out. Tom said the color drained from her face so fast, it looked like someone pulled a plug. Within seconds, the room exploded, board members clawing for their phones, frantically searching FSPA penalties, and is this federal prison stuff real? Someone apparently whispered, criminal referral, and one of the older members started sobbing into her legal pad. Less than 24 hours later, the HOA's attorney called me. His voice was actually trembling. He offered to wipe every single fine off the books immediately if I just call off the federal agencies. James listened for about 10 seconds, chuckled, and ended the call. By Frida, why they worth the floating settlement numbers? By Monday they were pleading. The CFPB had already opened a full investigation, and investigators were scheduling depositions with every board member like it were the most exciting thing on their calendar. Local news vans started camping outside the neighborhood entrance, running nightly segments with headlines like, HOA tries to foreclose on the dead. The final settlement conference took place in a sterile downtown law office. Karen sat at the far end of the law table, looking like a deflated version of her former self, makeup streaked, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Their lawyer read the terms in a monotone, every fine rescinded forever. A full-page public apology in the Pine Valley Gazette, and a check for $45,000 to me personally for intentional infliction of emotional distress, plus statutory FSPA damages. Then the federal investigator took the floor and delivered the hammer. The HOA would operate under a 5-year consent decree with direct CFPB oversight, and any future violation would trigger criminal contempt charges. Karen's hand shook so violently while signing that the pen left little ink earthquakes across the page. The investigator wasn't finished. He calmly informed her that her name was now permanently entered into the National FSPA Violator Database. Her real estate license was under emergency review, and oh, by the way, the IRS had just accepted a referral for a 7-year audit of the association's books. Karen made a noise like air leaking out of a tire someone had just stabbed. The moment I'll never forget, she looked straight at me, mascara rivers running down her cheeks, and whimpered, "How could you do this to me?" I smiled, leaned forward just enough for her to hear, and said, "Rules are rules, Karen. Ignorance of federal law is no excuse." The investigator closed his folder with a snap and announced that the current board was dissolved effective immediately. New elections would be supervised by the state, and Karen Mitchell was permanently barred from ever serving on or running for any HOA board in the state again. Security had to help her out of the chair. Her legs wouldn't hold her. Her 20-year reign of terror ended with the quiet click of an escort's keycard. The aftermath was pure poetry. James fed me updates like they were gourmet courses. The State Real Estate Commission didn't just suspend Karen's license. They revoked it for life after discovering she'd been strong-arming elderly owners into below-market sales for years. The IRS audit turned up over $200,000 in embezzled funds, European cruises, Birkin bags, her daughter's destination wedding, all disguised as beautification enhancements. The U.S. attorney upgraded the case from civil to criminal. Local news ran a week-long series titled Death and Fines, the HOA scandal that shocked Pine Valley. Neighbor after neighbor came forward. The veteran fined for flying an American flag. The single mom cited for sidewalk chalk art. The widow threatened with foreclosure over a garden gnome. The stories poured out like poison, finally being lanced. When the indictment dropped, it was a masterpiece. 37 counts of mail fraud, one for every certified letter sent to my dead grandparents. Wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft of funds. Each mail fraud count alone carried 20 years. The prosecutor told the cameras this wasn't petty bureaucracy anymore. It was a federal felony racket. I attended every single day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with dozens of people Karen had tormented for years. When the foreman read guilty on all counts, she folded in half like someone had kicked her spine out. The judge, a woman who clearly had zero patience left for entitled bullies, sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, plus full restitution and $500,000 in punitive damages. As the marshals cuffed her, Karen shrieked that she was only trying to protect property values. Her voice cracked into a sob that echoed off the courtroom walls while the doors closed behind her for the last time.